Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Acer Aspire S13, which is a 3-pound notebook that measures about 0.6 inches thick and sells for about $699 and up normally, and that's for a model with a Core i3 processor, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 128 gigabytes of storage. This is actually a model that I bought myself because it was on sale for $699 with a Core i7 Skylake processor, 8 gigs of RAM, and 256 gigabytes of storage. And I'd been in the market for a laptop. I've been using the same one for about 4 years, and I said, this is a really great deal. It's a little too good to pass up on. So I went ahead and bought it, and there's a lot that I really like about this laptop, and there's a couple of things that I don't love. So we'll get to each of those. But first, let's take a quick look at the features. I mentioned some of the specs, but if you take a look here, we've got a full-sized USB port, a headset jack, and a full-size SD card slot, full-size HDMI, another USB 3.0, and a USB 3.1 Type-C connector, which is not used for powering the laptop, but it can be used to connect an external display or USB hubs or all sorts of other things. And there is a separate power jack over here, which works with this power brick. It's not the largest, it's not the smallest that I've ever seen. It has a fairly small tip, if that's the sort of thing that matters in any way. But it's not something that you necessarily need to carry with you all the time either, because this laptop does get around 7.5 hours of battery life in my testing. And that's using the Google Chrome browser as a blogger. That's sort of the most important tool in my workflow. If you're not using a web browser and you're not using Chrome specifically, you might be able to get slightly longer battery life. Now I want to show you something else here, which is that full-sized SD card slot. It's nice to have if you're copying pictures to and from a camera, but you can see that the card sticks out quite a bit from the edge there, so it's not something you're necessarily going to want to keep plugged in all the time. If we take a look at the bottom of the device, you can see that there are a fairly large number of vents in the back here, and stereo speakers, which are reasonably loud in the front. Like most laptop speakers, they don't have a lot of bass, but they do get the job done if you're just watching a video or doing some other things. You'll probably want to plug in headphones if you wanted to do some serious music listening. The vents here do help keep the device cool, even though it's got a Core i5 or Core i7 Skylake processor. It doesn't get particularly warm when it's on my lap or on a table. It does get a little bit noisy from time to time, so if you're using this in a quiet room, you might notice that. You might also notice that there's a couple of screws down here on the bottom. You can open up the case and get inside if you wanted to upgrade the storage. The memory is soldered to the motherboard, so if you want a model with 8 gigs of RAM, which is the most that this comes with, you're going to want to buy a model that has 8 gigabytes of RAM. The lid has a sort of plastic feel, whereas the rest of the body is magnesium, alloy, and aluminum. It's got a sort of a ridged design here, which does a pretty good job of repelling fingerprints and oils, but it kind of collects dust. Whereas the rest of the device actually does a pretty good job of collecting fingerprints. So we've got a brushed aluminum look here. We've got a sort of plastic around the screen here, and a fairly large bezel. We'll get to that in a moment. I'm not a bezel hater, but some people are. I know they're not going to love that. But first I want to take a quick look at the keyboard, which is a backlit keyboard. Let's go ahead and turn on the computer so that you can see the keys lighten up. And we've got a large precision touchpad here. It supports multi-touch gestures and edge gestures and so forth. You can manage it in the Windows 10 settings. The keyboard itself, reasonably comfortable to type on. I haven't had any trouble with it, and I'm a touch typist, and the biggest issue that I have is down here in the lower right-hand corner, where the page up, page down, volume up, volume down, arrow keys, etc. are all sort of crammed into this tight spot. So you can see these two keys are the same size as that one key. So we've got 6 where you'd normally expect to find 3. And that can make it a little bit hard to detect them by touch. I also don't find it super intuitive that these keys also function as the volume or the brightness keys, whereas these are the volume keys, but then the mute key is all the way over here. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. And this is something I've been complaining about on Acer laptops for a long while. This is the first Acer laptop in a long time that I've owned. So I've been using this for about 2 weeks, whereas a lot of the laptops that I review for Liliputing are loaned to me and then I send them back. I'm starting to get used to this, and I suspect that over time I'll get more and more used to it, and I'll stop complaining about Acer keyboards. But it's probably the thing that annoys me the most. The fan noise is a little bit annoying, but I can deal with a loud fan, whereas again, some people are going to hate that. This is my least favorite thing. Another keyboard quirk is the location of the power button, which is right next to the delete button. I haven't accidentally hit the power button when I meant to hit delete, but the nice thing to know here is that even if you do, you have to press and hold it before anything happens, so you're not going to accidentally put the computer to sleep. Now the laptop has a matte touchscreen display. It's a full HD screen, and it does not have edge-to-edge glass like a lot of laptops with touchscreen displays do, which means that you can sort of feel your finger move from the bezel to the screen itself. Doesn't bother me too much, but it takes a little getting used to, especially if you're trying to sort of do things like move browser tabs at the top of the screen. Like I said, the bezel's a little bit on the large side, but the viewing angles are really nice, and it's a matte screen, so I've got a pretty bright light up here, and you can see that there's a little bit of reflection here, but generally speaking, on this sort of laptop, you would, let me actually reduce the screen brightness and you'll see what I'm talking about here. On this sort of laptop, you would often, instead of seeing my shadow as I move my hand across here, see my actual reflection, and right now you don't see a reflection. Likewise, if I put this near the window, you can see just sort of a little bit of shine, but not necessarily a lot of glare. So this isn't something that you're necessarily going to want to use outdoors all the time, but if you brighten the screen enough, you can use it in a pretty bright setting without having too many issues seeing. I'm going to go ahead and log in, show you a couple of Windows features for performance. And while this does come with Windows 10, it is capable of running other operating systems. This is something I bought from the Microsoft Store, so it's a Signature Edition laptop. It has a couple of Acer utilities, but for the most part, it runs stock Windows software. But you can disable Secure Boot by switching from UEFI to Legacy Boot Mode, and that does allow you to load alternate operating systems. I briefly tested Ubuntu, and you can find more information about that at Liliputing.com. Wi-Fi worked, touchscreen worked, Bluetooth worked. Overall, Ubuntu seems to run just fine on this. I did not install it to the local storage, so I can't really talk about performance in a dual boot environment or an installed environment, but generally speaking, it works. So the touchscreen is something that I wind up using a lot more than I thought I would, because this is a device that has a touchscreen that you can reach up to instead of reaching down to the touchpad when you want to, and when it's on your lap, I find that's a pretty natural change to make. But it's not a touchscreen tablet-style device, so I disabled, for instance, the on-screen keyboard, so that when I touch this, instead of having it pop up for a second before you start typing, it doesn't do that. You can go into the Windows settings and make that change. Now, as I mentioned, as a blogger, Google Chrome is sort of the app that I use the most, and I often have more than a dozen browser tabs open. With 8 gigs of RAM, this really has no difficulty handling that kind of activity. I'm going to go ahead and also play an HD video here in the background. Once I can skip the ad. Alright, so that's HD. I'll turn up the volume just for a moment so you can hear it.
Laptop, and that's exactly what it is. It's just that a lot of the components of the laptop are actually running on a tiny card that looks like this.
Alright, so let's mute that. And you can see we've got that playing on that side. Over here, got a little bit more going on. Now let's load GIMP for image editing. GIMP is probably the slowest loading program that I use on a regular basis, but it loads pretty quickly on this laptop with a Skylake processor. Now, I did buy a Skylake laptop at a time when Kaby Lake chips, the 7th generation Intel chips as opposed to 6th generation, are available, but there's not a huge difference in terms of what you can expect from sort of the Core i7 U-series processors. You get slightly better performance, slightly better graphics if you went with Kaby Lake, but Skylake is still pretty good, and it's a big upgrade from the 2nd generation Sandy Bridge that I had on my old one. So you can see here we can do a little bit of markup, we can crop or do other things here. So for image editing, document editing, it's more than sufficient. I also ran some graphics benchmarks, including 3D Mark, and you can find the scores at Liliputing.com in the text version of this review. Generally speaking, this is one of the fastest laptops that I've tested. Now, I tend to focus on affordable portable notebooks, so there are definitely faster machines out there, but for the most part, it's responsive, gets decent battery life, has good viewing angles on the screen, which if we brighten the screen a little bit here, we can see that this video, for instance, we can tilt the screen back, we can tilt the screen side to side, and the colors still look pretty good. And as you've seen as I do this review, touchscreen responsiveness is pretty nice too. Now, as I mentioned, you can see there's a little bit of a gap here. Your finger, or not even a gap, but your finger will sort of move when you touch the side of the screen, but it does respond pretty well to touchscreen gestures. You can also see that the screen wobbles a little bit when you touch it sometimes. And you can also see that the webcam is above the screen as opposed to below the screen like it is on the Dell XPS 13, which is another compact notebook. At 3 pounds and 0.6 inches, this is not the thinnest, it's not the lightest laptop, it's got the larger bezel. Coming from a Samsung Series 9 notebook that I've been using for 4 years, which is also a 13-inch notebook, but one with a slimmer bezel around the screen, I had to buy a new case because this wouldn't fit into the slipcover for my old phone. Because this doesn't have an Ethernet jack, I had to buy a USB Ethernet adapter, but still, with that $699 price point that it was on sale, it was pretty hard to resist. So, generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with the performance of this machine. The screen looks pretty good, the performance is pretty good, the battery life is pretty good, and the price was really great. Now, this particular model that I paid $699 for is going to retail probably closer to $899 most of the time. So if you can find it on sale, I'd say it's definitely a stellar deal. If it's not on sale, yeah, I'd say it's probably worth $899 too. There are definitely notebooks out there that have touchscreen displays, full HD screens, backlit keyboards that sell for more than that and offer similar performance. This particular model is not necessarily the prettiest, although it's pretty nice looking, I think. And it's not the lightest, but it generally offers the kind of performance that I was looking for in a laptop. And so I'm pretty happy with the purchase, particularly given the price. And I'm hopeful that this also lasts me 3 or 4 years as my next notebook. So this is a slightly atypical review because generally speaking, people like to justify the notebooks that they've paid for. And I'm not going to say that this is necessarily the best bang for your buck, but it's a pretty good bang for your buck because of what you get for the price range, especially if you can manage to find it on sale. So you want to check out the Microsoft Store, check out Amazon, check out Newegg, see what the current prices are for this. If it's on sale, I think it's definitely a steal. So that's the Acer Aspire S13. This particular model has a Core i7 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, and 256 gigabytes of storage. You can find more pictures, more performance notes, and other details at liliputing.com.